The barbecue was nothing special, the usual crowd. Burgers, beers, Mike's loud friends. Bored, I guess, because that's when my eyes landed on Steve. He always made me a bit uncomfortable, that quiet intensity. This time, though, the intensity sparked something in me. It was like a little switch flicked, and suddenly, everything changed. Nothing big happened that day, just small talk by the grill, but I left feeling different. Agitated, hot under the collar. Maybe it was the extra wine. Then, a few days later, my phone buzzed. An innocuous text, a joke about how bad Mike's burgers were. Only it wasn't from Mike, it was Steve. I froze. Then I smiled. After that, it was like a game. A stupid, dangerous game. My phone lining up with his messages, harmless flirting at first, but getting bolder. The buzz of his name on my screen felt like a shot of some forbidden liquor. One night, tipsy on more wine, I dared myself. Texted him something I knew I shouldn't have. My heart was pounding when his reply came back, a simple smirking emoji. It was on. We made up code words, hidden meanings behind everyday texts. It was exhilarating. I'd be at the grocery store, texting him about bread and eggs, and my face would flush with heat. I found myself daydreaming about him constantly, the dull routine of my life with Mike fading into the background. I needed this, needed to feel something other than the monotony, the slow suffocation. Then, the perfect opportunity came. My best friend was getting married, a whole bachelorette weekend getaway. The lies rolled off my tongue easily, a few carefully placed complaints about needing a break, fake excitement about spa treatments. Mike barely looked up from his fantasy football scores to even nod. That first night with Steve, it was messy. In a cheap motel room of all places, the smell of stale cigarettes clinging to the curtains. But it was also thrilling. It wasn't about romance. This was about adrenaline, about feeling alive. Feeling powerful, in control. It was about me finally getting what I wanted, for once, without having to ask or explain or compromise. Coming home from that weekend with Steve, I felt like a different person. I lied about canceled massages and manicures, my voice smooth as I sold Mike the whole story. He bought it, of course. He always bought whatever I fed him. One taste of that forbidden fruit and I couldn't stop. Steve wasn't enough anymore. It started with Tom from the gym. He lingered after our workouts, his eyes smoldering. When I touched his arm, accidentally, a spark ignited. I felt powerful again, not just some bored housewife. Then Rob. Mike's work buddy. He'd always seemed so buttoned down, it was the thrill of the unexpected. Each time, I felt this surge of excitement, a twisted kind of satisfaction. Then, disaster. Mike found a receipt from some seedy motel. His face when he held it up. A mix of confusion and something else, curt maybe. I panicked, words tumbling out of me. Fake tears. A story about a surprise work trip I never went on. How I'd hidden it to avoid Mike getting stressed over work stuff. He narrowed his eyes, but in the end, he believed me. Pathetic how easy he was to manipulate. And that made me bolder. My flirting became more obvious, just subtle enough to be plausible deniability, but everyone at Mike's work parties were starting to notice. Especially his friends. There were knowing looks, smiles under their breath. I started to wonder if they knew about me and Steve, about all of them. It made me hotter, the idea of them knowing, judging me, yet wanting me all the same. One night, after a few too many at a neighbor's barbecue, I brought Steve back home with me. We weren't even trying to be quiet. Later, Mike climbed into bed with me, his body heavy with beer and sleep. Steve's scent clung to my skin. As Mike moved on top of me, all I could think of was how much better Steve had been, stronger, more demanding. The whole thing was both exhilarating and repulsive. With every thrust, I felt powerful. And dirty. I wasn't trying to hide it anymore. Canceling dinner with Mike for last-minute yoga, while meeting Steve for drinks. New lingerie he'd never seen. The faint smell of unfamiliar cologne on me when I'd come home late. The thrill came from how obvious it all was, the way Mike's suspicion must have been gnawing at him. I wanted him to know, to feel the burn of my betrayal. I started pushing it further. At parties, I'd let my hand linger on Rob's shoulder, whisper something in his ear, loud enough for Mike to hear. I'd tell stories, drop hints with a sly smile, just vague enough that I could play innocent, but suggestive enough for Mike to squirm. He was never good at confrontation, always bottled it all up. Watching him get more frustrated, seeing the doubt cloud his eyes, it fed this ugly hunger in me. It made me feel powerful in a way I never had, in control of my own desires for once. And then Tom started getting clingy. Wanted to talk about feelings, wanted me to leave Mike. That wasn't part of the plan. It was never about them, just about what they could give me. I cut him off quick, but he started acting weird. A few too many drinks one night and he shouted at me in public, something about Mike deserving the truth. My control over the game started to slip, the cracks I meticulously crafted in my facade were starting to widen. My world turned into a frenzy. Nights filled with too many faces, too many empty bottles. Even some of my friends started giving me sidelong glances. Word was getting around, my neat little housewife image was no longer a mask but a pile of shards at my feet. The thrill had started to sour, the exhilaration of danger replaced with a knowing fear twisting in my gut. Then the letter arrived, thick paper, no return address. And inside, a single printed line. Your husband hired me to follow you. My heart pounded, I was sloppy, got cocky. This wasn't a game with Mike anymore, this was real, and it had consequences far bigger than a bruised ego or a jealous rage. It should have scared me, made me stop. Instead, I felt a surge of defiance. I pushed it this far, I wasn't backing down now. If Mike wanted to play dirty, I was ready. This game had only just begun, and the stakes just got a whole lot higher. The investigator's letter fueled a shift in the game. Mike started acting odd, not angry, not accusatory, just distant. It was unnerving. Before, his anger would have given me something to fight against. But this quiet emptiness, it was like staring into a black hole. Had he always been this pathetic? Or had I broken something so deep inside him there was nothing left to salvage? I spiraled. The thrill dawned, replaced by a jittery unease. And I got sloppy. A bright red lipstick stain on Mike's collar, deliberately obvious. My diamond earring, accidentally, left on the dashboard of the car. It was childish, reckless, but I was desperate for a reaction, for something to break this awful silence. Then it came. A manila envelope left on the kitchen table. No name, just neatly printed labels, surveillance report. My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside, proof of my treachery laid out in stark detail. Photos of me and Steve leaving cheap motels, lingering kisses with Rob in a crowded bar, a timeline of my deceit. I felt sick, but an angry defiance bubbled up alongside the nausea. If Mike wanted a confrontation, he'd get one on my terms. I wouldn't cower. The next evening, I waited until Mike got back from work. I tossed the envelope onto the table. From your little spy, I said, barely able to keep the venom out of my voice. His face crumpled. It was ugly, satisfying. He looked old, defeated. I went on, my words pouring out hot and cruel. I told him everything. About how he bored me, how weak he was, how much I enjoyed betraying him. I wanted to hurt him the way he was hurting me, with his silence, with his pathetic refusal to fight back. When it was over, I expected an explosion, accusations, the throwing of plates, maybe even physical violence. It would have been a relief, a sign he hadn't completely shut down. Instead, he sat at the table, staring into space. His voice was flat, dead. I want a divorce, he said, and you can get the hell out of my house. It was the coldest victory I could have imagined. Mike's request to leave was a declaration of war. If he wasn't going to crumble under my attacks, then I'd make his life a living hell. I took Steve, Rob, and whoever else would have me out on the town. Flashy restaurants, where everyone knew Mike and me, where his buddies would stare with disgust. Whispers followed me everywhere, the words, slut, and homewrecker, cutting through the buzz of conversations. His friends, the ones who used to laugh at my jokes and flirt a little at company barbecues, now turned their backs when they saw me. Their wives shot me icy glares in the supermarket. The safe, comfortable life I had taken for granted had been torched, the social connections Mike had built over the years reduced to nothing but ash. It was bitter satisfaction, but at least I was inflicting some pain. Then Rob started acting up. He wanted more money, claiming he had even juicier details to sell to the tabloids. My world narrowed into a frenzy of hushed phone calls and wire transfers, a desperate attempt to quiet his threats. The control I'd so carefully cultivated started to crack. That's when the divorce papers came, a thick, impersonal stack of documents laying out the end of my marriage in cold, legal terms. Mike wasn't playing games anymore. He'd hired the best divorce attorney in town, and the documents made it clear I wouldn't be getting a cent more than I was legally entitled to. The life I'd expected, the house, the financial security, was being erased line by line. The hits kept coming. Word of my antics had reached the small design firm where I worked. Clients canceled contracts, muttered something about morality clauses. My boss, sympathetic but clearly uncomfortable, suggested I take an extended leave. I knew what that meant. My career was on life support. My carefully constructed world collapsed in on itself. Friends I'd known for years stopped returning my calls and texts. The dinner invitations and girls' nights out dried up. It was like I had a contagious disease, people avoiding me at all costs. The loneliness, once just a background hum, became suffocating, filling the empty space Mike had left behind. I doubled down on the only thing I seemed to have left: the fleeting, meaningless encounters. Parties turned into alcohol-fueled blurs filled with strangers' faces I barely registered. I chased a high I couldn't find and woke up each morning with a dull ache behind my eyes, a deeper hollowness gnawing at my core. One morning, I awoke to an unfamiliar face and a night I had no memory of. A hazy recollection of a crowded bar, a stranger's insistent hands, and Fina Euro nothing. My stomach lurched, but I pushed down the growing dread. This was how things were now. Then the missed period came, followed by another. At first, I chopped it up to the stress, the chaos of my life. But the gnawing unease lingered, like a whispered warning in the back of my mind. I went to the drugstore, my hands shaking as I bought the test. There, in that sterile bathroom, the two pink lines glared back at me. A surge of panic, sharp and cold, cut through me. But then, something strange happened. A twisted flicker of triumph emerged, a lifeline amidst the wreckage. This baby. It was a weapon, a chance to claw back some control. Maybe even to get Mike back. It was a desperate, pathetic thought, but in the wreckage of my life, it felt like a glimmer of hope. The pregnancy test sat on the bathroom counter like a time bomb. This child was supposed to fix things, but now it felt like just another disaster. Mike was my last, pathetic, hope. I gripped the phone, took a deep breath to steady my trembling voice, and dialed. Mike, it's me. Listen. I'm pregnant. My voice strained, trying to sound shocked, vulnerable. Maybe a hint of regret could work its way back into his heart. There was a long silence on the other end. Finally, Mike spoke, his voice devoid of any emotion. It might not be mine. The words hit me like a physical blow. My desperate plan crumbled instantly. My knees gave out and I sank to the bathroom floor, the phone slipping from my fingers. The only sound was my ragged breathing in the cold, empty room. The paternity test came a few weeks later, another stark document amidst the chaos of my life, a final declaration that this child was not Mike's. It wasn't even one of his friends, but some random stranger I couldn't even remember. The brief flicker of twisted triumph I had felt when I first saw those two pink lines on the test evaporated, replaced by a bone-deep shame. I wasn't just alone, I was a pariah. The life I had carefully built, the image I'd projected, the comfortable existence, had exploded into nothing. And the final blow came when my parents called. Their voices tight, words clipped. They couldn't hide their disappointment, or their disgust. Even my own family was done with me. Their support, the last thing I thought was unbreakable, had been withdrawn. I was truly, completely alone. The wreckage of my life made me desperate. I was grasping at straws, and the quiet bartender, Josh, seemed like a possible lifeline. Unlike the others, he wasn't some hotshot lawyer or cocky gym rat. He moved with an unhurried ease behind the bar, his eyes holding an unexpected depth. He'd listen as I rambled, and the flicker of judgment I saw in the eyes of others was missing in his. By reputation, the whispers that followed me seemed to amuse him rather than disgust him. His small, modest apartment became my sanctuary. We'd order takeout, watch old movies, and for a few hours, I could pretend the disaster I created didn't exist. With him, I wasn't the town pariah, just a slightly bruised woman in need of comfort. The baby I carried, once a desperate weapon, now felt more like a lead weight. I ached for something, anything resembling normal. Josh and his quiet life started to feel like a safe harbor in the raging storm I'd started. The wild streak that had consumed me had done nothing but leave me hollow. I clung to him, testing his limits. I hinted about the baby, about how a real man would step up. I watched his face, searching for disgust or hesitation. But Josh had this uncanny stillness about him. He didn't recoil, just offered me another beer, a soft smile, and a change of subject as if I hadn't just dropped a bomb in his lap. In that moment, I didn't know if it was his disinterest in the drama or a deeper strength that drew me in, but I needed to find out. Josh didn't give me the answers I expected. No grand gesture of love, no disgusted rejection. Instead, he'd mull over my hints about the baby, looking both intrigued and confused. I pushed harder, playing the victim, talking about needing a good man, a real father. Maybe it was the desperation in my voice that swayed him, or perhaps some strange sense of responsibility. He surprised me again. He agreed, not with the enthusiasm you'd expect, but with a quiet resignation, a sense of duty. A wave of relief crashed over me, but underneath it, a new coldness settled in. I had manipulated this kind, unassuming man into my mess, and the victory felt rotten. We moved in together, too swiftly for comfort. His tiny apartment suddenly felt cramped, the walls closing in around us. I tried playing the perfect housewife, cooking meals, doing laundry, but it was a poorly executed act. This domestic charade couldn't hide the wreckage I was, the chaos I had unleashed on my own life. The whispers of the town, the rumors that dogged my every step, eventually made their way to Josh, slithering in through half-heard conversations and awkward silences. I could see them eating away at him, sidelong glances from his friends as we walked down the street, knowing looks when the topic of the baby came up. He started withdrawing, the warmth in his eyes dimming. He tried to hide it, but I knew. Then came the night I couldn't take it anymore. Too much wine, too much guilt, and a desperate need to destroy what little I had left. I confessed. Not just the baby, but everything. Steve, Rob, the parties, the lies, the whole sordid mess. His face crumpled. It wasn't sadness, it was utter betrayal. The fragile foundation we'd built on lies had collapsed entirely. I saw in his eyes the same disgust I saw reflected in my parents', in Mike's, in the whole town's. Only this cut far deeper. This man, who amidst the chaos had offered me brief respite, a glimpse at something normal. Even he looked at me like I was poison. Like I wasn't even a person anymore. The aftermath felt almost anticlimactic. Josh didn't rage or scream, didn't pack his things with dramatic fury. There was just a quiet sadness in his voice when he told me he was leaving. The same resigned kindness that had drawn me to him in the first place. He didn't slam the door behind him, just closed it softly, as if finalizing a chapter we'd both known wouldn't last. I was completely alone now. The apartment, once a sanctuary, felt oppressive. The baby inside me grew, a constant reminder of the wreckage I'd brought upon myself. Walking down the streets, I could feel the stares burning into my back, the barely concealed whispers as I passed. The fleeting escape Josh had offered was gone, leaving me exposed and vulnerable in the harsh light of my own destruction. The birth was a blur of pain and humiliation. The nurses moved with forced cheer I didn't deserve. There was no Mike waiting eagerly in the hallway, no excited grandparents marveling over their new grandchild. Just me, and this tiny, innocent being that was now tied to my failures forever. Motherhood, the thing I had taken for granted in my old life, was now a relentless ordeal. Sleepless nights blurred into endless days of feeding, changing, and the crushing weight of my mistakes settling deep in my bones. The fleeting thrills I'd chased had evaporated, leaving a bitter taste and a nauseating sense of emptiness. Each cry from the baby was like an accusation echoing in my head. I couldn't escape the knowledge that I had recklessly brought a child into a world where I was the source of pain and instability. Word must have reached Mike. The custody papers arrived with the chilling efficiency of an executioner's blade. No hesitation, just a legal dismantling of my life. In stark, unfeeling terms, he laid out the case, my infidelity, my erratic behavior, the danger I posed to myself and to this innocent child. It was brutally precise and irrefutable. In my quest to destroy my marriage and inflict suffering,